Thank you, Rachel. That was a really in-depth report about Jeffrey Willis, but I want to talk a little bit more about what we can expect today in the sentencing hearing. So joining me via Skype is my very good friend, criminal defense attorney Adam Gana. Adam, great to have you back here on Law and Crime.
Good to see you, Jesse. How are you?
I am good. So let's talk about what we can expect today during the sentencing phase. I imagine the family members of Ms. Heringa, as well as Jeffrey Willis himself, he said that he plans to provide a statement. What do you expect today?
I expect a lot of tears. I expect a family that is going to be angry, upset, hurt, and looking for a maximum sentence against Mr. Willis.
Now, we have to talk about what Willis has been saying in leading up to this leading up to this sentencing hearing. He said that he plans to read a statement directly to the courtroom and also addressing Rebecca Bletch's family. He says he has something that he wants to say to them, and he also has a problem with the jurors. In fact, he told a news outlet that I do rip on the jury members. I don't know if they were aware or not, but there were at least a half dozen or so that were falling asleep almost the whole trial. Willis said, really? This is my life, and they're effing sleeping? That is a big statement to make, and from other news outlets, there's been no indication that at least 6 jurors were sleeping during the course of these proceedings. But what do you make of that?
He's angry, and I understand why. It's not the first time that I've heard of jurors or judges sleeping in a courtroom during a trial. It doesn't mean that he didn't get a fair trial. It just means that evidence drones on over 6 weeks. Having to listen to people speak about such crimes is a difficult thing. And so, you know, it's unfortunate if it did happen. And if it didn't happen, you know, I wouldn't be surprised. This man has been convicted of murder, you know, and I believe he's angry. But if he's looking for any degree of leniency that the court could give him, he better be coming with some degree of contrition and not coming with the level of anger that we heard in some of those statements earlier today.
Hard to feel sympathy for this guy. We covered him in his other sentencing hearing during the Rebecca Bletch case. He blew a kiss to the gallery and also walked out before the family were able to provide their statements. But under a new law in Michigan, I think it's called the Bletch law, convicts have to remain in the courtroom during victim impact statements. What do you think about that change in the law?
I think it's a great change to the law. I mean, the Bletch law was specifically designed to make sure that Mr. Willis sits in his seat when he is being sentenced for a crime during victim impact statements. You should, you know, look, it takes us to a broader question, Jesse. We want a system of laws that are designed to help rehabilitate people. And when this man is going to prison for the rest of his life, if you want him to be an upstanding citizen in that criminal penal system, then he should have to think about the things that he's done and know the people that he's injured. He shouldn't be blowing kisses to the galley and walking out during victim impact statements. It's inappropriate.
I mean, we keep talking about what he's going to say, and I can't wait to see what he's going to say and what his statement may say about the Rebecca Bletch family and the court system. He thinks he's been wrongfully accused. But we do have to talk a little bit about Jessica Heringa's mom. She doesn't believe that her daughter is dead. So we're not sure if she's going to give a statement. She didn't attend the trial. But imagine if she does attend. What do you think she might say here?
You know, it's really up in the air. I mean, it's tough to say that a man should be convicted of the murder of your daughter if you don't actually believe that she's dead, or that he should be sentenced to life in prison if you don't actually believe that your daughter's dead. If I were a betting man, I would say she probably does not show up today, because if she's adamant about the fact that her daughter is alive, then she probably thinks this circus has nothing to do with her.
This is pretty fascinating to watch. I'm keeping a careful eye on the courtroom feed. As soon as we're live in that Michigan courtroom, we'll jump in. We don't want our viewers to miss anything during the sentencing of Jeffrey Willis.
I don't want to miss anything, Jesse.
I don't want you to miss anything, Adam. That's why you're here. You picked a great day to come on. It should be noted that Willis is already serving life in prison for the Rebecca Bletch murder, but this is, I don't want to say a formality, but this is another victim. This is another victim, and it's a question about whether or not he will face a third trial, because as you heard in these other 2 cases, he was involved or implicated in the potential abduction of a teenager, and it's a question about whether or not he'll face a third trial. This guy is in and out of the news and in and out of our courtroom, in and out of the courtroom and in and out of our feeds. We constantly talk about him. So we will address the Jeffrey Willis case as soon as we get that live feed, but I want to switch gears right now and move over to Kentucky. As I mentioned at the top of the program, we are covering the case of a Marine who was killed, and the prosecution is saying that he was shot in cold blood by two men, Quincinio Canada and Dewan Mulazem. These two men are on trial for the murder of Jonathan Price, as well as robbery and assault. We have a short report about that case, in case you missed it. Take a look. As I said, we have a busy day. We're going to be covering that case as well, live back in that Kentucky courtroom. Let's bring back on Adam Gana to talk a little bit more about it. Adam, this is such a tragic case, such a sad case about a Marine, and the prosecution said it best. He didn't die on a foreign battlefield. He died in the hands of his wife in a parking lot. But
not technically in the hands of his wife. I think that they were at the bar for her birthday, if I remember correctly, and she actually was shot a little bit of distance from him and actually couldn't get to him during his waning minutes because of her own injury from the shot to her leg.
You make a great point. We're going to play her 911 phone call in a little bit, and you can hear her on the phone call saying how much she loves him. She keeps saying, "I love you, I love you, I love you," and she feels so unbelievably helpless when you hear this. It's such a sad situation. But the defense is bringing out a lot of points here and saying that the police, investigators, the prosecution went in with a narrow focus towards their clients, and that these two men are not the ones who committed this crime, but that there's evidence pointing to other individuals. What do you think about that?
I don't think too much about it, except to say that, the big difficulty that the prosecution is going to have is that the wife of the victim, and frankly, the victim herself, is not going to testify that these two individuals were the ones that were involved in the robbery. That could pose a problem for the prosecution.
Yeah, she said she didn't want to make a mistake and accuse the wrong men, but there's been what's interesting about this case is it's tied to a robbery 6 days earlier. So the prosecution believes that a gun that was stolen from a Quality Inn robbery was the same gun that was used to kill Jonathan Price 6 days later, which I find interesting because if you're going to commit a crime, you're going to commit a murder, why use the weapon that you stole from another crime? Does something not add up there, or is this just stupid planning?
Terrible planning, but makes perfect sense, right? You think if you got away with the crime in the first place, that you then have a weapon that's not traceable back to you. And so I can understand the logic behind it, although the logic is not very sound, if you ask me.
Well, let's also talk about the fact that, we'll address it in a minute, that the gun was not found in the hands of the defendants, but was found in the hands of a third individual, Antonio Fry, who is not one of the defendants. Let's talk about that in a minute. Before we jump back into, again, I'm keeping a careful eye on the courtroom feed, I want to play Megan Price's 911 phone call. Adam and I were talking a little bit about it. This is the moment after she was shot and her husband was shot, and it doesn't get any more real than this. Let's play it for you right now.
Let's do the 911. I can see the parking lot. That's a video that he got shot. Okay. The black guy came up. Okay, ma'am, I can understand you. Where are you? Austin City parking lot. My husband and I both just got shot. Friends. What is your name? Megan Price. And did you see who did it, Megan? Two black guys. Did they leave in a car or on foot? On foot. My husband came up bad. I can't move my leg. He shot my leg. Is there anything you can remember about them? Two black men. And that's all? Did you see the guns? Both had guns. One had dreadlocks. White shirt. Which one? The one that shot me. They threw my husband into the truck. Into a truck. Jonathan, I love you. Jonathan, I love you. Jonathan, I love you. Where was he shot at, ma'am? I don't know. I can't get to him. I can't get to him. Help me. Help me. I need my husband alive. Wait, just stay on the phone with me, okay? I'm going to get you until we get there. They're all on the way.
Every time I listen to that phone call, it's just so difficult. I mean, as I said, it doesn't get any more real than that. A wife calling out to her husband who was shot through the back. The bullet went through his heart, and he died immediately. It is a really, really tough case to cover. I want to bring back on Adam Gana. What do you think about when you listen to that phone call? And also, what do you think the jury is thinking about when they listen to that phone call?
I'm throwing the book at the defendants. I mean, that kind of call is heart-wrenching. I mean, and you know, the jury really, in this particular case, is a very difficult job separating the law and the facts and the emotions associated with a case like this. This is a gut-wrenching case. A young couple, a Marine, killed not in a line of duty, but just sitting in a gas station parking lot. I mean, it's the kind of thing that really pulls at your emotional strings, and I think that the prosecutor is going to do whatever he can to make sure that those emotional strings get tugged on, and I think that the defense is going to do everything they can to try to raise some degree of reasonable doubt, but the jury's going to have a real tough time in this case, I think.
It's not it's not an easy case to cover. It's not an easy case to sit on a jury for. It's a really, really emotionally charged case. And you're trying to see what the defense is doing and trying to poke holes. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about what the defense is throwing in there. Do you carry anything to the fact that the gun was not found in the hands of any of these defendants? It was found in the hands of a man named Antonio Fry, and he was not brought on trial for this.
Of course it makes something. I mean, look, when you're a prosecutor, you always want to find the murder weapon in the hands of the murderer. It makes your life a lot easier. In this particular case, the fact that it wasn't may pose a problem for the prosecutor in getting a conviction at the end of the day. But he does have an emotionally charging case, and they might rely on that more than you would if the gun was found in the hands of the defendant.
And the other big piece of evidence that the defense said was that the DNA found underneath Jonathan Price's fingernails does not match the DNA of the defendants. And I'm still kind of up in the air about the struggle that may or may not have happened before the shooting. We understand that Jonathan was defending his wife before the shooting. I just can't positively determine whether or not there was a scuffle between them where he would have gotten their DNA in his underneath his fingernails, excuse me. But what did you make of it?
You know, I don't think that it helps the prosecution much when you have things that create reasonable doubt. So, you know, in a case like this, when you are finding DNA that doesn't relate back to the defendants, you start to create that degree of reasonable doubt. I'm fairly confident that neither defendant is going to testify in this case. But if they did decide to testify and said that there was that they had some sort of ulterior alibi, then I think it could really help their case, but I don't think they're going to.
Yeah, we're keeping a careful eye on the courtroom. We want to see what happens next in this really, really sad tale. And speaking of which, we played the 911 phone call, but I want to play a little bit now of Megan Price's testimony. She did testify in open court against these men. So let's play a little bit of that, and then Adam and I will break down more of this case. That's Megan Price, who was shot 4 years ago through the leg, while her husband was shot through the back, and his bullet went through his heart in a really, really sad case that took place in a parking lot outside of a bar. The two men who are on trial for her husband's murder, as well as her shooting, their names are Quincinio Canada and Dewan Mulazim. We are covering that case here on Law and Crime. We are waiting for the live feed in the courtroom. I want to talk a little bit more about the idea of why it's taken so long for this case to go to trial. So let's bring back in criminal defense attorney Adam Gana. Adam, I'm sure in your expertise that cases take a long time to get on the docket. But here, there was extreme frustration both from the family members as well as the judge in this case, Pamela Goodwine, about how long it's taken. In fact, a year ago, the judge said that she was fed up with delays in the case when the trial was postponed yet again. It was evidence that public defenders who were representing these two men said that they needed more time to prepare because of heavy caseloads were blamed. In fact, at one point in the hearing last year, the assistant prosecutor, Kimberly Baird, was tearing up, and she said, "This is so unfair to the Commonwealth. I recognize this is me being angry. It's so not fair. I recognize this is going to get continued, as does the victim's family." And it did. I mean, we're here a year later, and we're finally getting to trial. However, Jonathan Price's mother, who testified earlier in this case, said, "Look, we don't want the defense to come back and say that something was done wrong. We want everything done right the first time." So she understood the delays. But from a layman's perspective, our viewers, why on earth do these kinds of cases take so long to finally get tried?
Well, it's twofold, Jesse. First, it's the judge. Judges sometimes let these cases get out of control. They allow continuance after continuance when the defense asks for it. And number two, it's an overworked, underpaid public defender's office, which is common across the entire United States. Everyone under the Constitution is entitled to a defense. And the Commonwealth of Kentucky in this case is required to provide it. And they're underfunded and understaffed, and it's a real problem for them. Those two things combined cause a major delay in cases. But the judge shouldn't have allowed it to delay this long. And it's ironic that the family says we want it done right the first time so that we don't have to come back here and do it again. But more often than not, there will be appeal after appeal, a habeas corpus appeals as far as the court system will allow, regardless of whether it happens quickly or not. So,
yeah, this is a
case that won't
live.
close quickly.
I'm sorry, Adam?
This is a case that won't close quickly.
No. That's a live feed into the courtroom. We were showing you a shot of the defendants. The one with the braids is Quincinio Canada. The other one with the shaved head is Dewan Malazim. Again, we believe Malazim is the uncle of Canada. And the reason that becomes a big issue, Adam, is one of the witnesses from the Quality Inn robbery said right after they were robbed, right as they believe the defendants were leaving, they heard Malazim say to Canada, or I should say, they heard one of the assailants say to the other assailant, "Come on, nephew." If that is true, how many uncle-nephew crime spree pairs do you have running around Kentucky in that area? I guess that's a big piece of evidence.
Yeah, and obviously a rhetorical question. I mean, not many, I'd imagine. But, look, I mean, the evidence will speak for itself during the course of this trial, which is now 4 years delayed. And, and the jury will have a decision to make. Is there reasonable doubt or not? And so, in this particular case, it's just gut-wrenching to watch. And so more so than many of the cases that you and I have worked on and seen together and reported on, it's not, this one's particularly bad. And I think it's going to be a problem for the jury in making a decision.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's got a lot of moving parts, and we talked a little bit about the appearance of the defendants because that became a really big issue in terms of the lineup that was produced for the victims to point out who did this. But I want to play the testimony some more of Megan Price when she identifies her assailants and listens to some of the key characteristics she uses to describe them. Let's play that for you right now. That, again, is some of the testimony from Megan Price, one of the victims in this horrible case out of Kentucky that we are covering. A new witness is on the stand right now. We're live in the courtroom. Before we jump in, I want to ask Adam Gana a quick question. Identifying the defendants is a big issue in this case, and the defense is saying that this is a question of mistaken identity, particularly with the fault in the lineups. I'm sure you read a little bit more about that and saw it yourself. The testimony about the lineups being faulty in the sense that, one of the defendants, Canada, has a facial tattoo, and that was removed when his picture was put in the lineup. Do you sense anything, a problem here with mistaken identity?
I mean, it's going to be the crux of the case, whether or not Megan Price's inability to definitively identify the two defendants as the perpetrators of this crime is going to be the quintessential question for a jury as to whether or not reasonable doubt is raised.
You're right. You're right. It really is everything, isn't it? Let's go live into the courtroom. But before we do, just want to let our viewers know that we have an update in the Wallace-Bradsher case out of North Carolina. The jurors have resumed their deliberations, and if they come with a verdict anytime today, we'll make sure to update you. But right now, let's go live into that Kentucky courtroom about this case of a killing of a Marine. Okay, everybody. So we are covering this case. We were live in that courtroom. A security camera expert was on the stand talking about the different angles and we kind of saw it a little bit in the prosecution's opening statement, where certain nearby businesses had camera angles that may have captured the defendants near the crime scene. I'm talking, of course, about the shooting, the Jonathan Price shooting. We have a new witness that will be coming on the stand soon. We're keeping a strong eye on that. But before we do, want to bring back in Adam Gana, criminal defense attorney, to talk a little bit more about this. Before we hear our next witness, I want to go back to the idea of mistaken identity. We're talking about how there's the Jonathan Price shooting, and then 6 days before that was a robbery at the Quality Inn that the prosecutors are saying was committed by the same two men. But when you talk to the three victims of that robbery, one of them, who identified the defendants on a lineup, posted a racist tweet about black people and saying how they all look alike. That's a big problem because the other victim in that robbery couldn't positively identify either of them, and the other person in the other victim only identified one of the defendants. So that's not the kind of testimony that I'm imagining the prosecution wanted.
I mean, we live in a digital age, Jesse. Everything you say has a digital footprint now, and you have to be very careful about the types of things you put online. But that is a public service announcement more than anything else. This man and his tweet were clearly racist and clearly a problem for the prosecution. I think it's going to be a real problem when you have the only witness that can positively identify these two individual defendants at the robbery, saying that all black people look the same in a publicly available tweet. I mean, it does not bode well for the prosecution, Jesse.
People, come on, they just have to know better. Don't post everything on social media. Everybody, you're not a comedian. You're not a comedian. Everybody is putting a little bit too much stuff on social media, and obviously it's not only going to potentially affect them, but potentially affect the case against these two individuals. So let's go back live into the courtroom. We have a new witness. Detective James Barber from the Lexington Police Department is on the stand. Let's go live. That's a live feed in that Kentucky courtroom where two men are on trial for the murder of a Marine. Want to bring back in criminal defense attorney Adam Gana. Adam, as I listen to this cross-examination of Detective James Barber, I can't help but think about the defense's strategy. Keep saying that the police had a very narrow focus and looked only at the defendants. What do you think about that strategy here? And is that an effective strategy overall? Because I've seen it happen a lot of times.
You know, it's a real problem, I think, for the prosecution. You want to be casting as broad a net as possible when dealing with trying to ascertain who's responsible for a crime. And if they're just looking at these two, I think that doesn't bode well for the prosecution.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you see it, it's like out of a Lifetime movie. Well, not even a Lifetime movie, but a movie where they say, oh, they already threw the books at my clients, and they didn't look at this person, they didn't look at this person. They're saying that there were tips that were coming in, even from an attorney, about this case, and they ignored it. It's pretty big statements. I'm not sure if it'll work or not, but let's go back live into the courtroom. This is, again, Detective James Barber from the Lexington Police Department. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. Now, I am not 100% sure, but I think the next witness might be a family member of one of the defendants, Mr. Malazem. Adam, if that's true, what's going on here? Why would the prosecution call such a witness? Adam, I think we lost your audio. We'll jump back to you in a minute. We'll get it figured out. That is Judge Goodwine directing the next witness to the stand. Again, I believe this might be a family member of the defendant, which is so interesting seeing a defendant's family member being called by the prosecution, but let's listen in live. Welcome back, everybody. This is a live feed into that Kentucky courtroom. Two men, Quincinio Canada and Dewan Malazem, are both on trial for the murder of a Marine named Jonathan Price, as well as the shooting of his wife, Megan Price. She was shot through the leg, but she survived. And they're also on trial for robbing 3 people from a Quality Inn 6 days before. Evidence from that crime is being used to connect the defendants to the shooting. We just saw the testimony of Nafisa Malazem, who is the sister of Dewan Malazem, brought on for, I counted it, 2 minutes to talk about that he is her younger brother, that they live together. She was played a video from the surveillance footage, which you talked about a little bit earlier today, and that she saw him buying a cigar and driving off. She didn't recall having a conversation about Dewan wearing a hat, but she said he does like to stay fresh and he wears a hat to match his outfit. So it seems that the prosecution just called this family member to positively identify the person in that video. We thought that they might get a little bit more out of her, but they really didn't. This is a very, very sad case when you hear about what happened, a young Marine being gunned down on his wife's birthday outside of a bar in a parking lot. The prosecution explained it really well, that this man didn't die on a foreign battlefield, but that he died right there, right beside his wife. As Adam Gana explained earlier, she wasn't able to get to him. She wasn't able to cradle him. She wasn't able to get to him because of an injury that she suffered, a gunshot wound to the leg. Back here with Adam Gana now. Adam, what do you think about the testimony from Nafisa Malazem? Really short testimony. How come they brought her on just to positively identify him in the video? Wouldn't you have maybe asked a few more questions?
Not much to say, I think. I mean, I'm not sure really what more they really needed from her. I mean, she's the sister of the defendant, okay, and she was able to positively identify him on the surveillance tape. So I don't know really what more they would need from her, especially because they're having so much identification issues in this case in both crimes. I think it's important to have at least somebody who knows the defendant well possibly identify him at the scene of the crime.
So for anybody who's just joining us or anybody who hasn't been covering cases, the two defendants are represented by separate public defenders. Why do you think that is?
You know, there could be a number of reasons why there would be two separate public defenders. One is they might have a different view as to their own potential liability. They might also want to make it seem as if they're not in the same boat in this trial. One of the defendants may think they have a stronger case than the other. Generally speaking, it is when both parties are actually guilty, it's the one that didn't actually hold the gun that usually would ask for separate representation in a trial, and also delays the trial longer when you have more cooks in the kitchen.
The reason I ask is because the public defender for Malazem provided an opening statement, but not the public defenders for Canada. And I was curious why you think that might have been.
You know, they might just be following the lead of the lead public prosecutor, the lead public defender in this case. You know, and doing sort of like a Me Too. They probably had nothing additionally that they wanted to add, and they just allowed the one opening statement to suffice for both of them.
It's an interesting case to follow from multiple angles. You have the defense saying that the prosecution didn't do a thorough job, that the state didn't do a thorough job, that they were biased. You have the emotional testimony from the victims in this case. You have a young Marine who was gunned down, and you have all these interesting little legal hurdles, especially the fact that this is a death penalty case, and it's going to be a while we're going to be in this courtroom looking and seeing what happens to these two defendants. I want to play, they're in a recess right now in the courtroom, so I want to continue playing for you the testimony of Megan Price. Again, this is a really, if not the most important, probably, but I would actually, you know what I'll say, the most important witness so far. This is one of the victims explaining what happened during the shooting. And just, Adam, before we jump to that clip, what should a jury take from the testimony of a victim, and not only a victim who was shot in the leg? So what kind of, is there any way for the defense to poke holes in her testimony and saying perhaps she didn't hear or think or see what was actually going on properly?
The defense is probably going to want to confirm her testimony sufficient for the jury to hear and understand that she is not positively identifying either defendant in her testimony. And I think that's where they're going to want to pay particular attention and focus. You cannot say with any degree of certainty, Ms. Price, that either of the defendants were at the scene of the crime, can you? And I think that's where the principal focus is going to be. You don't want to attack a victim that lost her Marine husband. I don't think that's going to play well with the jury as a defense attorney. But I think you want to make sure that there remains reasonable doubt as to the defendant's guilt.
Yeah, it's Her testimony, her 911 phone call, it's you have to listen to it. It's pretty incredible. But here we have an update in another case that we're covering. I told everybody that we have a very busy day here on the network. We are live right now in the Jeffrey Willis case out of Michigan. That is the defendant himself. I believe he is reading a statement. I want to confirm. We do have audio, so let's go live into the Jeffrey Willis courtroom. Welcome back, everybody. So there you go. That is the Jeffrey Willis sentence, and that is laid down by the judge. I want to bring back on real quick Adam Gana. I know we have to sign him off in a little bit, but I would like his thoughts in terms of this sentence. We heard that Mr. Willis will get life in prison for the felony murder charge, and I couldn't quite make out what the sentence was for count one. But Adam, what did you think about Jeffrey Willis's statement saying that he was wrongfully accused and even teared up at points and named specific jurors? What did you think about that?
You know, in a case like this, the man's going to prison for the rest of his life no matter what. And so I think his philosophy is that he is going to go down swinging. It sounded like a narcissist criminal who was trying to find a way, any way, to get an appeal going. And it's just unfortunate that that is where the victim's family is going to have to get their closure from.
Yeah, he even explained the kiss that he blew in the gallery during his Rebecca Blech sentencing and saying it wasn't a hateful kiss, it was a one-up against the prosecutor who he believes was doing something improper. Adam Gana, I know, unbelievable. Adam Gana, thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait to have you back on.
Thank you, Jesse. Good seeing you.
Good seeing you. All right, everybody, so we are going to go live right now back into the Canada and Mulazim courtroom, the two men that are charged with the murder of Jonathan Price. Just to let our viewers know, I wanted to make sure they knew it. On count one for Jeffrey Willis, he was sentenced to 18 years to 40 years on count one and life in prison for felony murder, which was count two. We're going back live now into that Kentucky courtroom, two men on trial for the murder of a Marine. Let's go right now.